He called me old school in front of the entire strategy team, smirked like he'd invented oxygen, then tried to explain my own compliance framework back to me using a flowchart he'd lifted off LinkedIn. I didn't bother correcting him. I just sat there, sipping the same bitter break room coffee I've had for 19 years, listening to Lucas, freshly minted from whichever MBA kennel the CFO's money had purchased, call my audit flags paranoid bottlenecks. That was my first clear signal. This wasn't about efficiency. It was about erasure. People often mistake silence for weakness, tenure for exhaustion. That's why executives love legacy employees, until we remind them that we built the bones they're still dancing on. Lucas didn't even know the difference between risk logs and access protocols. He thought segregation of duties referred to seating charts. Yet somehow, this walking symbol of nepotism had been handed the title of Director of Operational Efficiency. No interviews, no technical background, just a recycled TED Talk voice and a last name that made HR curtsy like it was still 1954. Before Lucas arrived, my workdays were quiet loops, steady, uneventful, clean logs, humming pipelines, zero outages. I'd trained every intern they sent my way, even helped 3 former CFOs turn their lost children into decent junior analysts, 2 of whom still send me holiday cards. But Lucas wanted blood. He barged in, started cutting before even reading the schematics, deleting redundancy tags I'd placed after an SEC near miss in 2018. I asked politely if he'd like to review the audit history before making changes. He waved me off. "It's called Agile, Mason. Maybe Google it." That's when I realized this wasn't restructuring. It was a purge. By the way, if you're still here, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It means more than you think. 97% of viewers listen without subscribing. But this one's different. This is the one they'll remember. Back to Lucas. In his second week, he issued an internal memo to retire a tool I'd built after the FinCorp breach, a system that cross-referenced external vendor updates against internal payroll entries. His reasoning? It clutters the dashboard. I scheduled a one-on-one. He skipped it twice, then sent a Slack message. Just trim the fat and get with the program. No greeting, no signature. I flagged the risk, documented every change, and quietly forwarded it to internal review. The next morning, the CFO called an all-hands Zoom, 117 attendees, cameras on. He smiled, but not the kind of smile that means safety. He accused me of undermining a promising leader's momentum and demanded a public apology to Lucas for creating a culture of fear and inflexibility. I didn't react, just unmuted and said, "Okay." Silence. But silence has always been my strongest language. And when I said okay, I wasn't agreeing. I was preparing. Lucas never read the file names before deleting them. He just labeled everything legacy bloat and wiped out 6 verification nodes I'd personally built after our last SEC compliance warning. One of those nodes, a multi-factor check on disbursements, had caught 2 fraudulent vendor payments back in 2020. But to Lucas, if it wasn't in his color-coded Excel from week 1, it didn't matter. He called anything older than 5 years archaeological debt, as if decades of institutional memory were fossils to be swept aside so his father could brag about a lean tech transformation on the next investor call. When I flagged a vulnerability his deletions had caused, one that could let duplicate contractor IDs bypass invoice limits, I even attached screenshots and a before-after flow. He replied 3 hours later, "Appreciate the heads up, let's stay solution-oriented." That was rich, coming from someone who thought sandbox environment meant installing a browser plugin. I escalated the issue quietly through the same encrypted back channel I'd helped the compliance team build years earlier. I wasn't trying to embarrass him. I was trying to protect us. But at this company, hierarchy mattered more than safeguards. And Lucas's last name sat on top of the pyramid. When the CFO found out, he didn't ask questions or review the flagged risks. He just scheduled another all-hands meeting, cameras on. Lucas's face glowing like he'd just won a spelling bee. "Mason," the CFO began, leaning into his webcam, "we've heard you're creating internal friction. My son is trying to innovate, and you're clinging to outdated systems." I stayed silent. "Effective immediately," he continued. "You're off the operational pipeline unless you publicly apologize for questioning leadership." Some people blinked. One gasped. Most just looked down, like hostages pretending not to hear the ransom. Lucas didn't say a word, just smiled, that practiced half smirk of someone who's never earned authority, only inherited it. I unmuted, understood, then logged off. No rebuttal, no speech. Because real power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits, quiet, patient, surgical, long enough for everyone to forget where it came from. The cursor blinked on my resignation template. I didn't type a word. Not yet. I just sat there, hands steady, letting the silence settle like dust in a server room. No anger, no fear. Only clarity. Because when someone mistakes your silence for surrender one too many times, that silence becomes a signal. That Zoom call wasn't punishment. It was permission. I opened an encrypted drive I hadn't touched in years. Digital artifacts from a version of me they'd long forgotten. Back when I was still consultant, not legacy asset. The contract title, 2004, Original Systems Architect, Pre-acquisition, pre-rebrand, before every executive who walked in pretending this place was built yesterday. And there it was, the clause I'd written myself back when I trusted no one's word but my own. Clause 7C. In the event of forced project removal without due process or cause, contractor retains exclusive rights to derivative software modules created independently during original system design, including, but not limited to, audit frameworks, vendor compliance protocols, and reporting dashboards. In plain English, if they fired me without cause, I owned the bones. They'd never noticed. Not once in 19 years. I began building my exit the same way I'd built everything else, quietly, precisely, without loose ends. I logged into my real admin console, not the shiny shell Lucas had bolted on for appearances. I disabled 3 internal sync licenses. Not revoked, just allowed to expire gracefully. No alerts. Then I printed my resignation letter and left space at the bottom for something I wasn't ready to write yet. Next, I opened my checklist, not a to-do list, a kill switch catalog. Every asset, every vendor line where my name or LLC appeared. Ridge South Systems, my old consulting firm, had never been dissolved. Just dormant. Until now. First, revoke the license handshake for the audit dashboard. Second, disable the backup sync to Lucas's investor-ready dashboard he bragged about every Thursday. Third, prep archival encryption logs for legal handover. On paper, it looked like cleanup, but anyone paying attention would notice what was missing. I encrypted the logout timers, labeled them session rotation maintenance, and set them to cascade, one system every 12 hours. Subtle enough to pass unnoticed. Then I reached under my desk and unplugged a thumb drive that had sat in a dummy port since 2015. Inside, the last working copy of the compliance shadow logs. No cloud, no duplicates. Just mine. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't rebellion. It was insurance. If they were going to kick me out of the house I built, they weren't keeping the foundation. The first system to stutter was the investor portal. Just a soft timeout error. Nothing catastrophic yet. Lucas probably assumed it was a server hiccup or a missed renewal. I could practically hear him blaming a contractor overseas before even glancing at the error log. If he had checked, he would have seen the status line, and license ping returned inactive handshake. That handshake used to renew automatically until I turned it off. Meanwhile, the dashboard he loved flaunting, the one he named Apollo Metrics, as if he'd launched it to the moon, flickered, loaded blank tiles, then froze. He had hard-coded it to pull from a live view table buried behind a secondary firewall. Without my key, it showed nothing. Lucas stared at a white screen where his demo data should have been. Still, no one suspected a thing. That's the beauty of quiet exits. Everyone's too busy chasing meetings to notice what's no longer functioning until the lights go out. Legal was the first to sense it. A vendor renewal auto-flagged for review. Ridge South Systems, LLC. My original consulting company. Someone in procurement forwarded it with a red AI marker to legal. I imagined a junior associate squinting at the metadata, wondering why this dormant entity just generated a license conflict flag. They'd figure it out eventually, but not before the dominoes finished falling. I walked into HR, resignation printed and folded neatly, badge clipped on top. The receptionist smiled too brightly. "Oh, are you transferring departments?" I nodded politely. "Appreciate your time." She didn't open the letter. Even if she had, she wouldn't have understood the last page. The clause summary and timestamp of my final login triggers. Outside, it was drizzling. Not a storm, not yet, but enough to feel the shift in the air. Back in the office, chaos was brewing. Lucas was probably blaming AWS latency. Legal was flagging expired contracts with words like legacy exposure. The CFO was likely rehearsing a quarterly call pitch about streamlining operations, unaware that the foundation was already cracking beneath his feet. This was the phase no one notices, when everything seems intact but quietly drifts out of alignment. Disconnect enough threads, and even the finest tapestry begins to unravel. Lucas strolled in Monday morning like he'd solved world hunger. Aviators hooked on his collar, protein shake in hand, spray tan glowing under fluorescent light. He tossed finger guns at the receptionist, who looked like she wanted to vanish into the ficus, then strutted down the hall, a hatch with the swagger of someone convinced silence meant surrender. When he reached my row, he paused, looked at my desk, really looked. No coffee cup, no Post-its, no wrist brace, nothing. Just the clean emptiness of someone who'd left with intent. Learned your lesson, huh? He muttered to the empty chair, trying to save face in front of a junior analyst who pretended her frozen screen wasn't betraying the whole system. Across the building, in a windowless room with 4 standing desks, alarms began to flicker. 7:43 a.m., unauthorized credential detected, license key invalid, normally a routine panic button. Someone mistypes a password, a vendor updates an API. But this one? It tied directly to the core reporting engine. The key didn't just fail, it returned null. No trace, no fallback, no backup copy. By 8:12 a.m., a Level 3 engineer messaged their team lead. Weird, Ridge South Systems is showing as vendor owner for the CF pipeline. Isn't that Mason's? Legal's Slack went from idle to DEFCON 2. A paralegal posted a screenshot of a flagged agreement last updated in 2009. One line highlighted, system continuity rights to remain property of Ridge South Systems unless advisory contract terminated under Section 14b3. No corporate signature. Just mine. Time-stamped, hash-verified, still valid. By 8:23, the CFO received a Slack ping from Melissa in corporate legal. Are you aware Mason Drake is still listed as the primary licensor for the core financial system? Need confirmation ASAP. This affects investor access. He didn't reply, because at that exact moment, Lucas was refreshing his dashboard, watching every graph he'd promised investors vanish into white boxes and red question marks. Smugness is a fragile currency. One bad morning, one unsynced feed, one buried clause, and you're no longer the company's future. You're the kid who broke the pipes trying to paint the kitchen. He probably thought I'd come crawling back with an apology and a smile. But that's the problem with people who confuse silence with submission. Sometimes it's the sound of a trap closing. By 9:03 a.m., half the pre-board data packets had failed validation. Every export returned a polite 502 error. Try again later. But there was no later. The investor decks were due by noon, and without them, the illusion of control shattered like glass. Lucas wasn't smiling anymore. The finance lead was pacing. Their junior analyst tried screenshotting graphs into PowerPoint backups, but there were no graphs to screenshot. The datasets themselves were sealed off. At 9:26, Melissa from legal burst into the CFO's office. He didn't look up, just stared at his blank Slack window like it might type an apology for him. Did you fire Mason publicly? She demanded, breathless. He blinked. What? Did you publicly fire him on record during a full staff call? He hesitated. I told him to apologize or step down, and he said okay. Melissa froze. Oh my God. Then louder. You can't do that. Not with his contract. Not with that clause active. She slammed the papers on his desk. Clause 7C, she said, jabbing the highlight. He retains derivative software rights if terminated without cause. The tools, the dashboards, the audit shells, they're his IP. We've been licensing through Ridge South under active advisory terms. You just severed that. The CFO went pale. That was 20 years ago. Surely that. It was renewed in 2018, she cut in. Mason signed the extension during compliance phase 2. No executive countersignature. It defaulted to his terms. But he's just a contractor. He was a co-architect, she snapped. And now he's a hostile vendor. By 10:04, 4 investors had already requested the final packet. None could access the files. Instead, the system redirected to a deactivated license page. Banner reading, Contact Ridge South Systems for authorization. That was me. That banner used to say "Powered by." I changed it over the weekend. Lucas locked himself in a huddle room, probably Googling how to override a vendor lockout. There wasn't one. Not for this. Not for something hand-built, line by line, by someone who never trusted people who only read the summary. What they called outdated was leverage, and now they were watching it slip away. At 10:30, the emergency board meeting convened. No slides, no agenda, just one subject line: compliance exposure, immediate review required. The first slide they opened wasn't a graph. It was blank with a single red line of text: Q3 audit trail file, not found. Whispers filled the room. Lucas's efficiency overhaul hadn't just been cosmetic. In his haste to make everything look lean, he'd wiped the only copy of the Q3 compliance log tree, the one I'd warned him not to delete. No versioning, no backups, nothing. That file wasn't optional. It was federally required for 2 government contracts. Its absence alone warranted investigation. Someone asked about recovery. Legal responded flatly. Mason Drake was the sole custodian of the encrypted archive. Silence followed, the kind that sinks in deep. That was the moment they realized I wasn't just the guy who'd left. I was the only one who still knew how to fix what they'd broken. By noon, the office had turned into a pressure chamber. Meetings stacked on meetings. The IT floor buzzed like a hornet's nest. No one saying the full truth out loud, but everyone knowing something irreversible had happened. Lucas had gone from confident to cracked. The swagger drained. His shirt sleeves rolled up, tie hanging loose. He was barking at engineers, trying to sound in control, but his voice kept shaking. Every minute that passed cost them money, reputation, and face. The CFO had called in a forensics firm. They promised a rapid diagnostic and data recovery timeline, which was a poetic way of saying, "We'll pretend to fix this," while praying the system unbreaks itself. Meanwhile, legal was quietly reaching out to me, not directly, but through intermediaries. Polite messages, subtle phrasing: "We'd like to discuss potential continuity support under advisory capacity. Would you be open to limited consulting hours for system stabilization?" I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I watched the stock ticker slide a few percent. Not catastrophic, but enough to send board members into private calls. The irony was perfect. They had spent months talking about innovation through disruption. Now they were living it, just not the kind they wanted. By 2:14 p.m., the forensics team issued their first report. Root cause analysis inconclusive. No malicious activity detected. Primary system dependency inactive. Vendor license expired. Attempted restoration failed due to checksum mismatch. That's corporate for we can't access it, and even if we could, we're not sure we'd understand it. Lucas slammed his laptop shut. "Get Mason on the phone." The CFO hesitated. "He doesn't work here anymore." "Then hire him back." "He has leverage," Melissa said carefully. "If we contact him, it'll be through counsel." Lucas scoffed. "He won't risk legal action. He's too old school." Melissa gave a thin smile. "You really think he doesn't have a plan?" They all stared at her. "He's been building his exit for months, probably years. You just didn't notice." Lucas leaned back, jaw tight. "You're saying he planned this?" She shrugged. "I'm saying he understood contracts better than you." That's when the second phase triggered, the one they didn't see coming. At exactly 3 p.m., every system tied to the internal compliance portal displayed a new notification: Ridge South Systems. License renewal option available? Click here to initiate reinstatement review. It wasn't ransomware. It wasn't a hack. It was an offer. The renewal page listed one condition, a simple one: restore prior consulting agreement under previous terms. Duration 24 months. Advisory status retained. I didn't need the money. It was about principle, about reminding people that when you build something, you own a part of it, not because of paperwork, but because you understand it in a way no outsider ever will. At 3:07, I got the first call. Unfamiliar number, but I knew the area code, corporate HQ. "Mr. Drake," the voice said, too formal to be casual. "We'd like to open a conversation about reinstating your advisory role." I kept my tone neutral. "You're having trouble with system continuity?" A pause. That's one way to put it. "I warned you about dependencies," I said. Everything was documented. "We're aware. We'd just like to discuss options. Send it in writing." "Of course." I hung up. Outside, the drizzle had turned to a soft rain, steady, quiet, inevitable. By 4:30, the renewal packet arrived. New compensation, restored authority, and a formal statement clearing my name. I skimmed the legalese, redlined 3 clauses, and sent it back with one note: reinstate system oversight under my terms or rebuild it from scratch. They signed before 6 p.m. Lucas didn't make eye contact when I walked back into the building the next morning. He stood in the hallway like a ghost in a glass tower, watching the engineers nod as I passed, the same ones who used to smirk when he called me obsolete. I didn't gloat. Didn't need to. The silence spoke for itself. They had mistaken restraint for weakness. They'd forgotten that some people don't need to shout to win. They just wait until everyone else runs out of moves. I signed the final reactivation command, restored their access, and left the room without looking back. Sometimes, revenge isn't about destruction. It's about precision, about removing your presence until it becomes impossible to ignore, and then reappearing just long enough to remind them who built the foundation they tried to bury. When the systems came back online, the first line on the homepage read exactly as I'd left it years ago. Designed by Mason Drake, Ridge South Systems. Lucas saw it, so did the board, and for the first time since I'd known him, he said nothing.